I can recall at least 4 friends I have talked to about Bungo Stray Dogs, arguably my favorite anime ever, that told me they stopped watching the series before finishing its first season. And for all the faults that they gave, that I largely do agree with, as I cannot pretend that season 1 was perfect, it felt like I very rarely heard complaints about the Azure Messenger arc. The Azure Messenger arc includes episodes 6 and 7, and I sincerely don't want to write a joke about that. Much like everything before it, it exists in its own little plot, with the beginning of the arc introducing us to the kidnapper case, which leads upwards into uncovering the Azure Messenger herself, which is fine. Season 1 was just plot of the week anyways before the Kyoka arc, which comes right after this, so nothing outrageous about the premise. So, with the simple premise out of the way and Kunikida and Dazai squarely on their way to solve this case, I won't keep the complaints waiting. Starting strong, the woman in this tank is Sasaki and is also the Azure Messenger and the 12th kidnapping victim, and is also somehow stuck in the water tank. And no matter how you spin this, the way she winds up here doesn't make sense, or more accurately, why she winds up here doesn't make sense. We know that from her perspective, it is useful for her to have her be considered a victim, so she can get close to the Armed Detective Agency. But we also know that the kidnapper and the organization above him do not know she is the Azure Messenger. She is just another one of their victims. So why did they separate her? Her being kidnapped also doesn't make sense since the driver would not have had an alibi. He could not very easily disguise himself as Sasaki. She doesn't fit any of the criteria of the previous victims, so it wouldn't make sense for her to be kidnapped in the first place. But okay, ignoring all of that and the fact that she is kneeling on the floor that is covered in glass, we come to the gassing scene and dude, I can't believe this slander of my goats. You mean to tell me that Dazai and Kunikida would instantly fold under seeing the people they're rescuing getting gas released on them? This is meant to be their big checkmate? This entire thing gets solved by Kunikida making gas masks and shooting the glass open. And this is the part that continuously pisses me off about this arc. It does not use the characters in an interesting way, or even in a way that resembles the actions of these characters later and earlier in the series. At the risk of sounding like I'm saying I could have written it better than the author that made the characters, I just look at the Dazai that solved the Yamagiwa case in a second and the Dazai that did everything else in the series, and then look at this scene and think, what the fuck was happening? Was he having an off week? And the same with Kunikida. You mean to tell me that he wouldn't have shot this glass open the moment he realized what was happening? He did it when he saw Sasaki. What happened between then and now that made him so hesitant? He was scared of getting gassed? Again, in what fucking universe? This is the same character that on 3 separate occasions tried to face tank a grenade like it was a party popper, even when it would not have saved the lives of the person being blown up. He would rather explode than live in a world where someone dies in front of him. You can argue that as development from this arc, but given he already starts the arc with the orphaning guilt, and that later in this episode he already avoids killing Akutagawa, I would rather wager that his hatred of seeing death is a bit older than 1 workday. And okay, before I continue with that scene, I have very little to say about the in-between scenes. They're fine. They're fun enough. I have to say that Dazai going along with Kunikida's presumption that he slept with Sasaki just to torture him was very entertaining the first time I watched this. Honestly, the whole scene in the cafe in episode 7 is one of the better downtime scenes in the first season, even down to Kunikida and Dazai locking in as soon as Rampo gives them information. But other than that, I have really nothing to say about any of the scenes in the office building. So, more about the scene with Akutagawa. Both the fight scenes in these episodes are very hit and miss. Starting with Akutagawa versus Kunikida, I can unfortunately hardly call this a fight scene. The fight is over in 55 seconds, and it only ended because the police showed up, not because there was a conclusive end to the fight. And the reason I say it is unfortunate is because the one hit that lands in this fight is incredibly cool and is one of the highlights of this arc, since it shows Kunikida's ability to think using his surroundings, his ability to cleverly use his technique, and the fact that he would never resort to lethal means, all in one string of actions. Though I hate that after the fight, Akutagawa says Kunikida is worthy of being next to Dazai, given the insurmountable pedestal he puts that man on, but I'll let it slide. Maybe he just really liked his rat tail, or really liked the image of him and Dazai making out. Either way, that about sums up my thoughts on the first fight. As I said, it is too short to say much. The second fight though, this one is weird. I guess I'll get my issues done with quickly. Dazai would for sure be able to beat this guy, maybe not as well as Kunikida, but he would still not go down against a non someone gifted that seemingly doesn't even use any advanced fighting techniques. Also, this is like the one time that we see them fight a gifted outside of any established organization. It feels kind of weird that we find out this group exists, one of their members having an unbeatable dueling ability, and then once these two go down, we never hear of them again. Even if this guy was the leader like Kunikida assumed, still doesn't make sense why they wouldn't find a new one, unless these two were the only organization members, which, I mean, hey, they sure were shooting high in that case. And with the complaints done, oh my god, this scene is actually so cool. The tag out showing how good Kunikida and Dazai's teamwork is, as well as showing how observant both of them are to both realize the fight is in the bag if they switch, and then the instant and effortless win for both of them to show that it isn't just that their assessment is spot on, but also that the skills that they have are the ones they excel in, even if for Dazai that skill is just having his ability. It is so cool. And Kunikida then, calm and collected, remaking the key, like it almost makes up for all of the sins of this arc. However, an almost is still an almost, and we have now come to the part that pisses me off the most. So, I still have a few scenes to talk about, those being the intel scene with Rokuzo, the graveyard scene, the abandoned building scene, and the final scene. And as you may notice, all of these relate to Rokuzo and his dad. And to first state it, I think that Kunikida's backstory with the Azure King is good. It feels like such an organic part of his backstory. I can totally envision a younger Kunikida, already very capable but hasty, being able to find the location of the Azure King, but not being patient enough to work with one organization to catch him. So instead, 5 people die, and he blames himself for it, because in his ideal world, those 5 people would have lived, and if he did anything differently, they would have. This is a type of grief that we see him have multiple times in the series, and I don't think it is unbelievable for him to adopt the kid of someone that died because of him. Rokuzo himself is a pretty weak character in my opinion. He barely gets any screen time before high noon, so we barely get to meet the kid and find out anything about him. It makes even more of this arc feel like it is just leading up to this one final scene. So, the Azure King, from what little we know of him, was a domestic terrorist that targeted people that were considered beyond the law in one way or another. He was violent, but not senseless. In fact, one could say that he was an idealist, except no, they fucking couldn't. Was he driven to do what he wanted to achieve? Sure, I mean, it probably takes a bit of willpower to set off an explosive in the postal office, but I draw the line at saying that this man was an idealist because at the end of the day, he was using means that he did not consider to be ideal. When talking about him, Sasaki says that he was, quote, willing to get the blood on his hands, unquote, to achieve his goal. His goal never was to get blood on his hands. Ideally, he would have put the criminal actions that he was fighting against to light without having to kill anyone, but he didn't do that. He went for an extreme option, one where he weighed that any lives that might be lost in his attacks are worth less than whatever good would come from his actions. Now, consider that one statement, and consider the entire character of Kunikida, the idealist that will only achieve his goals through hard work and self-sacrifice, and who has literally written in his book of ideals that an ideal world is not one where people die in front of his eyes, and tell me that these two are in any way connected. Dasai's entire speech at the end of episode 7 is so nonsensical and pointless that I can only imagine that episode 25 had to be written just so we get another shot at a Kunikida episode, and this time we do not imply that he will go on to become a terrorist. Well, I mean, the statement wasn't wrong, I guess. I would like to believe that I don't need to say more on this matter. Kunikida is as close to the Azure King as I am to Hatsune Miku, which is to say that one would really have to stretch their imagination and go through several extremely disingenuous arguments to get from point A to point B. At this point, we may as well say that the entire cast is alike to him. At least I can make more comparisons between the Azure King and Junichiro, or Kenji, or... So, you keen viewers might have noticed that I have been, ignoring Atsushi throughout this video. And the reason why is very simple. Because it removes absolutely nothing from this arc. In all the investigation scenes, he's only there to have everything explained to him. In the fight scenes, he either runs off screen or gets knocked out instantly. And in the final scene, he isn't even there. It is almost like the arc was written to not have Atsushi in it. So yeah, this entire video has been kind of a preamble, I guess. Those that are aware might have already typed it in the comments, but a lot of the faults of this arc come from the fact that this arc was the first ever arc of Bungo Stray Dogs, this being the adaptation of the light novel Volume 1, Dazai's Entrance Exam. And Atsushi isn't in this, like, at all. He wasn't created as a character at this time. He first appears in the light novel series in its 5th volume, so it makes sense that he is basically an invisible blob during the whole thing. The only reason for him being anywhere is just Kunikida saying that it is a part of his, quote, rookie training, unquote, but unlike every arc before this, we don't get to see how Atsushi is actually thinking or improving by seeing any of the investigative work. The closest we get to that is him being in awe of Kunikida and Dase's teamwork, which, well, fair, but I wish I got some more input at any point beforehand as well. But I'm a curious bird, and I have to admit I haven't read Dase's entrance exam before, at least not to completion. I read about the first 50 pages some years ago on a PDF, but given that I'm now an adult with my own rent to pay, I ordered the book so I can properly read it physically because I fucking hate digital reading. Nasu, publish Kara no Kyokai in English, and my life is yours. Okay, thanks. And once the book finally arrives, I'll read it and make an addendum to this video with my thoughts on the novel, how they differ from my thoughts in this arc, and how they might have affected my opinions on this arc in retrospect. And from what I remember over those 50 pages, I will have things to say. So I guess subscribe if you want to see that when it happens. Hope you enjoyed the video, consider watching another if you have time, and until next time, bye bye!